Welcome. I'm Tom, joined by Rich and Ollie for a special interview edition of the 100 Club. We're chatting to Data Insights Manager Dan Weston for the Birmingham Phoenix, and you're about to learn how to draft a cricket team and how data can make that team a winning team. Dan, a very warm welcome to the 100 Club.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really looking forward to chatting with you guys.
That's our pleasure, and it must have been a really busy week for you. So thanks for making some space. We've had the wildcard draft. We've had some squad adjustments going on right up to that deadline. But you've been involved with the Birmingham Phoenix since the very start, right? What's been your journey to the 100?
Okay, so I actually joined. I was one of the initial kind of founding members of the team, if you like. I think I agreed to work with them in April 2019. So it's been a quite a long process. I think we've done 3 drafts now. We haven't played a single match. So it's not the wildcard draft from last Friday. From my perspective now, obviously, I'm super excited to finally have those 3 drafts come to fruition, hopefully, in the tournament over the next sort of month or so. Mega excited. My journey to get there was an interesting one. So I have been writing about cricket, data, modelling, and analysing players and stuff for a long period of time. And I suppose to some extent I did that as a bit of a lost leader in terms of trying to get exposure and stuff and find roles in cricket, which is an extremely difficult process to go through. Most people, unfortunately, they don't want to know who you are unless you've got 50 caps for your country. So that's quite a difficult thing to overcome when you're 42 and overweight. Unfortunately, you have to kind of do a lot of the hard yards in terms of really trying to demonstrate your knowledge and then trying to catch the attention of the right people. And luckily now with a few roles that I kind of have managed to do that. But it was a very long and arduous process.
Yeah, you've sort of made the dream step. We're fans, we chat rubbish about it, but then you've gone to being professionally involved. I mean, so you're quite big on Twitter as well, at SA Advantage as well in that sense. I suppose the drafting has been quite a big part of it to date. I mean, how has the selection process worked?
Okay, so we have kind of a group of people who will all give insight, and then we'll kind of make a final call on the players that we want. The thing is, when you go through a draft, it's impossible to say, okay, well, I want him, and I want him, and I want him, because the draft is full of moving parts, especially the main draft, where we were pick 8, which was obviously quite problematic for us. And I think I haven't really hidden the fact that there was quite a few times when maybe we would have picked someone who had gone on like a few picks before, within the last sort of 2 or 3 picks before. So that was obviously quite a difficult one for us in terms of our positioning in the draft. So you can't really go in there with any fixed ideas. What you have to try and do, I think, to some extent, is to identify the skill sets that you're looking for in advance and what metrics and dynamics of players that you're looking for as well. And if you can do that and have a flexible mind on the draft, but have a lot of data back up and have a lot of organised conversations, I think, from my perspective, I would say that our work on player recruitment from all parts of our management group has been extremely thorough. So as long as we're well organised, we're well prepared, and we've got a strong rationale for making picks, then we can go into the draft with kind of a semi-flexible approach, and we have to think on the fly sometimes, and that's absolutely fine too. The only certainty is the team who get the first pick in the first round, really.
One thing we noticed when looking at how you guys drafted compared to the other teams is quite a lot of the other teams went overseas for their first 2 picks, and maybe some of them, the first 3 picks went for the overseas stars, whereas you guys waited a bit, kept your powder dry. You went domestic early. Was that a contrarian strategy you talked about beforehand?
I assume you didn't have data that said there's a global pandemic on the way. So,
I think to some extent, yeah. I mean, I think we all anticipated that the other teams would quite top load their rosters with overseas players, which kind of generally did manifest itself. The thing for us is that we want to build a strong domestic core which can serve us well over a number of years. And I think that also when you look at the value in the market and scarcity of resources, it was pretty smart to try and pick up a few good local players at the top. And then we know that there's many talented overseas players in the draft, not all of whom are going to be taken by other teams, because it's a lot harder to be drafted by a team in the 100 when there's only 24 slots available than there is in the IPL. I mean, look at the IPL. This December there's a draft, the auction, sorry, I should say, and there's 10 teams. There's going to be now 8 overseas slots for each team. That's 80 overseas players, only 24 in 100. So it's, in terms of availability of quality overseas players, even lower price points, there was still plenty of decent availability, and we kind of foresaw that a little bit.
And there were a few players, sort of pretty big name players that kind of got left on the bench in that original draft. Kind of, likes of Chris Gale. Do you kind of feel that he'd sort of set his price bracket a bit high?
I can't comment for the individual players, but I think that there were some players who probably were. I'm not saying necessarily him at all, but I'm saying that there were probably some players who were kind of unrealistically priced in terms of their reserve, and that didn't just go for overseas players. There was also some domestic players who you could probably say that about as well. For me, especially if you're a local player, this is a tournament you want to be involved in. So getting that exposure, especially if you're not an international player, is so huge. So to find sort of uncapped domestic players putting their reserve in higher was quite puzzling, really.
Yeah. You've ended up with a squad that is quite balanced. We think we've done our profile; it's not been released yet, but I think we think it's a balance. We spot the local emphasis as well on it. I'd be quite interested to work out what factors sort of are you putting into the 100 as for a player as particularly important. What's weighing most, and one I think Rich is quite interested in is how fielding has been quantified in that as well.
Okay, so I can't really discuss like specific metrics as to how we would value players, but we wanted that balanced squad, which I'm pleased that you said that you think we have, which is great. The thing that I've written a lot about, and I will kind of discuss briefly now, and you can kind of take from that what you will in terms of what it implies, is that in T20, 85% of teams win the match roughly when they have the highest boundary percentage in the individual match. So that's a lot more of a requirement than avoiding dot balls. So if you have a lower percentage of dot balls than your opposition, you still win more than half your matches, but it's nowhere near 85%. So I look at avoiding dots as like a nice to have, and scoring and preventing boundaries is mandatory. So that's obviously, and that's something I've written about a lot. I've spoken about it a lot, so it's no secret that I value that extremely highly. But it's very difficult to build a coherent team, even within that knowledge. So that's something that I consider to be extremely important. With regards to fielding, I mean, that's tough because I think fielding is like the next frontier almost in terms of application of data and where it's going to go. I don't have metrics for fielding. I will say that right now. But I mean, at this point in time, for a very short format like T20 or the 100, I don't think it's got massive application. Primarily because if you look at, I know that there's been some people who have tried to produce like a list of the best fielders and the worst fielders and runs saved per innings and stuff like that. I think the overwhelming majority, if not 95% plus fielders, are in plus or minus one per innings. So in a very tight gap in terms of a negligible contribution either way. There's a few fielders who might be like 2 runs saved or 2 runs cost.
That's literally the bounce of a ball.
Yeah.
It's a marginal gain. I think that, I mean, coaches are pretty good at subjectively judging which players are good at fielding and who aren't. And I guess for me, it's probably the best things to do is to just use that as a line call between two players who are similarly have similar ability in terms of batting and bowling, as opposed to something that should be a primary consideration when recruiting a squad. However, I would say that perhaps goes against conventional wisdom. So I think coaches might overvalue the impacts of fielding a little bit more than myself as an analyst would. But I'm fairly confident I've got the right approach there.
That's
I
interesting.
think just dashing Rich's dreams as getting a contract as a specialist fielder.
No, the question was slightly different to that, in that I see what you're saying about the relative merits of different fielders, and I think they're so well coached now, it doesn't make a huge difference, especially across a 100-ball game. If you look at baseball, which is probably a few years ahead of cricket in terms of analytics, there's been some quite interesting things done there in the last few years in terms of the way teams are deploying their fielders. You've seen some radical shifts that go against conventional wisdom in the sport, driven by data. So I was wondering if there's going to be anything in terms of field placing or fielding strategies developed as coming out of the data, rather than sort of the conventional field placings that we've seen for 50 years.
Yeah, and that's where I think that we might see the benefits of fielding analytics a lot more than perhaps the individual play, understanding which the individual players offer more value. Yeah, working out what the right fielding positions are, specifically against certain batsmen and certain matchups or whatever, certain phases of the match. That stuff could be a lot more valuable than understanding who are the best and the worst fielders. Yeah.
That's interesting, and I guess that sort of asks the question of where your involvement will come on match days as well.
Okay, so I mean, we haven't really kind of confirmed everything yet, but I will do a lot of the preparation with other analysts as well with the club. So we'll be doing a lot of pretty much preparation, preparing the coaches, hopefully preparing the players for the opposition and the venue and stuff like that. And I think that it's really important also for players to have like someone that they can go to in advance of matches to discuss plans and discuss opposition and stuff like that. So in that respect, I mean, it's quite an experience for me. But in that respect, because I don't work when I work with Leicestershire, I don't work like day to day with the players. But I think that most players that I've spoken to, there's a lot of players who come to me off their own back as well. They do have a genuine interest in kind of understanding where they're going wrong, how they can go right a lot more, understanding their opposition, things like that. And so in this particular instance, I'm always willing to talk to anyone and help them out in any possible way in terms of improving their output or potential output in a match. So yeah, looking forward to kind of working with players a little bit more closely as well in that respect.
Yeah, one of the things we've been talking about in our kind of thinking about the 100 and how it's going to perhaps differ from sort of T20 cricket is, I guess, firstly the power play and whether kind of we're going to see any different approaches, because it's that bit shorter.
Yeah.
Without kind of going into details, obviously that might give watching teams any sort of advantage of is data kind of playing a role in the way that the coaching staff are thinking about power play.
It's so difficult because obviously we've got a few new rules like the extra bowling back-to-back overs and things like that as well. I think it's so difficult to quantify the impact that these new rules will have, because obviously we haven't seen anything like that. I've done some work on it. I think I'm pretty confident of calculations for pass scores and stuff like that, which will naturally translate to the power play as well. But it is, at this point in time, it's an exact science, and that's a difficult process. You can't be pretty confident on it, but you probably can do a lot better than a guess at the same time. It's tricky. We don't know how it's going to go, but after a season, we'll have data that we can then analyse and go from there, or even part of the season we can start to see how teams approaching it. It'll be interesting to see how teams do approach that power play, because we've obviously got 20 less balls, and that in theory should, I think most people would say, will devalue the wicket preservation. So we might see teams go that little bit harder in the power play. And I think that's probably a fairly likely approach.
Yeah, we've sort of speculated, is there role for almost like a super pinch hitter to just go in and tee off from ball one?
Because this
absolutely.
Sorry, Dan, I was just going to say, observation as a fan, and you can tell me whether the data bears this out or not. Yeah. But I still get a sense watching some T20 that there are certain openers in T20 who still like to have a bit of a look and give themselves 4 or 5 balls before they'll go hard. Whereas we were speculating whether you might be employing people to, who are willing to almost go for it from ball 1 or 2 in that power.
No, definitely, and that's why I think the recruitment side of things is so important, because you can understand which players like to have a look, which players like to tee off straight away. If you can calculate that via metrics. If you have the resources and you have the kind of the mentality to ask questions of the data, then you can do that. But whether that's necessarily the approach that other teams have taken is debatable. But yeah, I mean that stuff's easily quantifiable if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, because it feels like that's the sort of stuff that would just gets lost if you're just looking at overall strike rates. So and averages, they don't really capture that granular detail that really gives you the insight about how a player plays, not just what's the end outcome over a season.
For a while on the perhaps I don't value strike rates as much as other people. Now, okay, so yes, I do value strike rates in terms of high numbers and stuff, obviously, but for me it's more important to understand how that strike rate is created for that batsman. So do they, let's say for sake of argument, let's compare 2 players. You've got someone like Chris Gale who just hits boundaries and barely bothers to run between the wickets, and so if you look at his boundary percentage, it's really high. If you look at his non-boundary strike rate, which is his strike rate for non-boundary balls faced, it's extremely low, one of the lowest in the world, actually. And then on the flip side, you've got someone like Virat Kohli, who has a low boundary percentage. Actually, I think in the 2020 IPL, it was the second lowest in the entire competition, which probably surprised quite a few people. No, actually, sorry, it was the lowest, and he was the lowest by about 3%, I think, if I remember rightly. Actually, he was the lowest in the 2020 IPL. But his non-boundary strike rate was like, if you're putting a graph, it'd be off the charts, because he was just so much better at rotating the striker and turning ones and twos than everyone else. But if you look at those 2 players' strike rates, it might not actually be that different, but the way that they scored their runs is completely different. And then, so with someone like Chris Gale, sometimes he does take time to have a look, whereas Kohli might turn the scoreboard over at the start, but he might not hit boundaries either. So then you've got someone like, I don't know, Will Jacks, who will just go and tee off from the start, and he's quite happy to deal with the consequences of getting out cheaply, because the amount of times he comes off, then that's absolutely fine. So it's understanding that strike rate and how it's created, what metrics go into creating that strike rate is the most important thing, rather than the actual strike rate itself.
Yeah, interesting.
And I think you've mentioned this as well, Dan, in another format, is that there might be a lesser role then for the all-rounder. The balance between the two. You might want just a batter to bat to a certain point in your squad, and then bowlers just to be bowlers. Is that fair?
To some extent, not. I don't think it's going to be as prevalent as T10, where I think that there's pretty much no need for all-rounders whatsoever. But I think that having one all-rounder, I think, is still going to be needed, because you want to have that extra depth at, say, 7. Because not necessarily because you expect your number 7 to face that many balls, but because you have to have a little bit of a safety net in case your top order don't come off, and also having that extra safety net allows them to have that license to tee off a bit more, because they don't have to worry about getting out so much if they know that they've got some extra batting down the order. The thing for me is that, okay, so I would much rather have a bowler who can hit 20% plus boundaries at number 8 than I would have to have a genuine all-rounder. Not genuine all-rounder, just an all-rounder. There's not many genuine all-rounders in the world. An all-rounder who's kind of just is a competent batter but doesn't really hit boundaries that much, I'd much rather just have like a hitter, like a Rashid Khan or a Hassan Ali or someone like that who could just come in and will just tee off straight away. I'd much rather have that, say, like an 8 than I would an all-rounder. So you've got someone, and when I say that is because all-rounders, they don't tend to be regular 4-over bowlers. They definitely don't tend to be 2 power play, 2 death bowlers. We have to hide them in the middle overs instead. And also the fact that they might not have such a high boundary percentage as well. So you're sort of picking a guy who's a substandard batter and a substandard bowler, but you're just kind of trying to sort of shoehorn them into the team for what they can offer a little bit in each area. Whereas with someone like, we talked about Rashid Khan, Hassan Ali, there are others too. Who they're genuine frontline bowlers. Obviously, they're genuine high quality bowlers, but they just happen to be good hitters as well. And they're the guys who I think have a lot of value.
And do you think you're going to think in terms of conventional batting order, as in you're coming in 6, 7, 8, or you're going to be thinking more in terms of, I want this guy in at ball 50, this guy in at ball 70, that sort of thinking?
That's a great question. I am a massive fan of exactly what you just say, the alternative approach in terms of, okay, so like, I don't know, first drop after 13 overs, this guy comes in just for the sake of argument, as opposed to number 5, number 6, number 7. Yeah, I'm massively a fan of flexible batting orders, and not just also for the time of the innings, but also for specific matchups as well. You might want to go left-hander, put a left-hander up the order if there's certain bowlers bowling and stuff like that as well. There's a lot of considerations, but yeah, I'm really keen to push teams away from that kind of traditional fixed batting order, if that makes sense.
It makes a lot of sense.
A little bit in the women's game, if there were a few balls left in the power play, just promote somebody up the order, from the middle order, just to kind of make the last, bring the last little bit of value out of the power play balls. Yeah,
no, definitely.
Okay, Dan, I'm going to ask you to stick your neck slightly on the line, if you're willing. Do you have any big predictions for the tournament? Is there a player that you think might have a breakout tournament we're not thinking about at the moment, or any other sort of thoughts that have come to you in the dark of the night?
Okay, so I'm really looking forward to seeing our new replacement player, Will Smeed, get some opportunities, because I think that he is a player with extremely high upside and someone that I'm really excited to see against higher level competition. And I think he's going to perhaps surprise a few people. If we're looking at other teams, or I'm quite loath to say, but someone who I think is extremely underrated by a lot of people is someone that I work with at Leicestershire as well. That's Callum Parkinson. I actually think that he's the best left-arm spinner in the country, orthodox left-arm spinner in the country, and the fact that I think Superchargers picked him up at a low price it was a good bit of business for them.
Well,
can I just following on from that, I wanted to ask about a player in your team who you selected in the draft, I think 5th or 6th, and you kept through, and that's Middlesex's Tom Helm. From a fan's perspective, when I look at the stat line, it doesn't look amazing to me from stats perspective, and I'm looking at the basic economy rate, etc. So tell me, as an analyst, what are you seeing in his style that's you're particularly impressed by?
I think there's a few things. So one, he bowls the tough overs a lot, and that can't be discounted. Secondly, he plays sometimes on quite small outgrounds as well, so that the Middlesex matches are pretty high scoring a lot of the time as well. So if they play like Radley or Merchant Taylor School or someone like that, then that will have an impact on all their bowlers' figures, and not just their bowlers but the opposition bowlers as well. And thirdly, I think his ceiling's very high as well.
Makes sense. And he's been rewarded today with a call up to the ODIs. So,
crunching the numbers at the ECB probably agrees with you.
Well, it's been a funny old day in that sense.
I'm not sure I massively agree with all the picks. So, it's pretty competitive.
Well, I think Stuart Board said it on Instagram. It says it's a busy day searching around in the cupboards at Lord's for the new caps. See if they've got enough in the cupboard.
The shirt print is going to be working overtime as well.
He is. Dan, that has been fascinating. Thank you so much for joining us today. I think open our eyes up as lowly fans. We stand there and we're quite in awe of this stuff. So thank you for joining us. We'll be continuing to profile some more of the 100, and I'm glad to hear you're looking forward to it as well.
No, absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much again for having me. It's been great to chat.
Great. And that Twitter handle again is @SAAdvantage. Check it out on there. And for everyone else, give us a like or put some comments down below. We'd much appreciate that. And we'll catch you next time on the 100 Club.